What's going on, everyone? It's Ben with YGO from Zero, back with another SDYK format duel. This time, we're delving into the fun world of Stall. So, as I mentioned in the guide, and if you haven't seen the guide, be sure to check that out. It's over 2 hours long, but I think it's fun. As I mentioned in the guide, stall decks are still a viable option in this format. They received some very powerful new tools, and when stall decks are viable, you know what that means. It means that Exodia is viable. Now, a bit of background on Exodia. Exodia was, I think, the best deck last format, just because there was no real way to counter it in game 1, and in games 2 and 3 it could always side deck into an aggro deck and just be incredibly strong. So it was probably the best deck of last format. This format, it's not quite as good. There are some tools that were introduced that really mess it up a bit, but I do still think it is pretty good. So let's just dive into the deck breakdown and discuss what changes the deck has undergone since last format and what the deck is trying to do. So, of course, the main win condition for Exodia is that you stall your opponent out for long enough so that way you can gather all 5 pieces of Exodia in your hand, and at that point, the head of Exodia's effect will let you win the duel. In order to do this, we're playing classic stall cards like Sword of Revealing Light, which was an all-star last format, and some new stall cards like Waboku, which is very good at sort of preventing your opponent's big offensive pushes, and Ultimate Offering, which is very good at getting out monsters to defend during your opponent's battle phase, at which point they'll dodge a lot of the removal in this format. So let's dive into the specific deck breakdown. We, of course, have all the pieces of Exodia at 3 copies. Having 3 copies of each piece just increases the consistency with which we'll draw all 5 pieces at an earlier point in the game. In addition, having all 3 pieces in the deck is especially good given card destruction being in the format. And card destruction is one of the most powerful tools that decks can side in against this deck, and it can really mess you up if you're playing less than 3 copies of each piece. So having 3 pieces is especially good. I think that some decks may main deck card destruction as well, at least 1 copy of it, just in case, to give them an edge against this strategy, potentially. So it's good to have 3 copies of each piece just in case. For our defenders, we have 3 Mystical Elf, 2 Spirit of the Harp. The reason for this is that Change of Heart is a very powerful card in this format. So if your opponent summons out like a beater and you have Mystical Elf or Spirit of the Harp in defense mode and they use Change of Heart on it, you're taking less damage from that attack than if you had had like a Giant Soldier of Stone, which would deal 1300 to you instead of 800. In addition, we're not playing Maneater Bug, because Change of Heart plus Maneater Bug will enable your opponent to just flip up the Maneater Bug, destroy itself, and just get through to attack directly. So Maneater Bug isn't quite the best here. Of course, if you have Ultimate Offering, Maneater Bug is very good, but oftentimes you won't have Ultimate Offerings in hand, and so you don't want to have to rely on that. For a similar reason, we're not playing Wall of Illusion, but more so the reason behind not playing Wall of Illusion is that Wall of Illusion is good when you can actually go on the aggressive, so clearing away your opponent's monster to enable you to get in for damage with something like Wicked Worm Beast or something like that. It's less good in this deck where the main goal is to stall out your opponent for as long as possible, because sure, it does set them back in normal summon, but it also prevents the monster that returns to hand from being destroyed with something like Raigeki or Dark Hole. So I think Wall of Illusion is less good in a deck like this, but if you want, you can play it, just like with Maneater Bug. This is just my personal preference for defenders in this deck, and it's what I think is the best. Moving on to the spells, we have our removal spells in the form of Raigeki and Darkhole. We are not playing Fishers in this deck because we've swapped those out for some powerful trap cards. But if you want to play Fisher just to sort of maximize the amount of removal that you have, to make sure that you can clear away all your opponent's monsters, then you definitely can. Just be aware that Wicked Wormbeast is a card in this format, and if you have too many removal spells and not enough stall cards, then you could suffer against that deck. We also have the Pot of Greeds just to draw deeper to our Exodia pieces, draw deeper to our good cards. Just an incredibly good card all around. We have 3 Swords Revealing Light. Yes, D-Spell is in this format and can deal with swords, but if your opponent doesn't have the D-Spell in hand, then Sword Revealing Light is still incredibly good at stalling your opponent out. And many decks only play D-Spell in the side deck anyways, so this is incredibly good for game 1. Moving on to the traps, we have 3 Trap Hole, great way to clear your opponent's monsters that they bring out, and one of the only ways that you can actually clear the Wicked Wormbeast. We have 3 Waboku, just to prevent your opponent's big offensive pushes, and then enable you to punish them for overcommitting with something like a Raigeki. And then last but not least, we have 2 copies of Ultimate Offering. Ultimate Offering is great at enabling you to bring out defenders during your opponent's battle phase so they can dodge removal. So we definitely want to play more than one of this card because we definitely want to see this card. But we don't quite want to play 3 of this card because if we draw too many Ultimate Offerings and not enough of our other stall cards or Exodia pieces, then we could be in trouble. So we played 2 as sort of a happy medium. Moving on to the side deck, we of course have a Smokescreen side. There isn't much more you can side into this Exodia deck to make the matchup better in game 2 and 3. So we go into a Smokescreen aggro side deck here. If your opponent swaps in stuff like D-Spell, Card Destruction, Remove Trap, then while D-Spell and Remove Trap may be good against the Swords and Ultimate Offering still in the deck, the Card Destruction will be less good against these monsters here, and we have the ability to go on the major offensive with the Change of Heart and Reinforcements. Now, you could also Smokescreen into an aggro deck that is not playing the Wicked Wormbeast, but I still think the Wicked Wormbeast is very good, especially since your opponent might side into more removal just to get over your 2k defenders. So I think playing the Wicked Wormbeast actually is a really heads-up play in the Smokescreen aggro strategy here. And also, you're already playing Ultimate Offerings, so I think that card pairs well with the Wicked Wormbeast anyways. But that's going to do it for the deck breakdown, so let's dive in to some games. Okay, we've got a game against Concane, the Exodia Master from last format. If you haven't watched the Duels from last format, which featured them playing Exodia, then just know that they are great at drawing all 5 pieces earlier than you may expect. And so let's hope that doesn't happen in these games, but I don't have the highest of hopes. So they're playing the Exodia deck, and I'm playing the Worm Control deck. I'm telling you, I can't get enough of this deck. It's so much fun to play. They are going to start off with a Pot of Greed, which is extremely good for an Exodia deck. Just set 1 card past to us. We're going to bring out a Battle Ox. We don't want to start out with the biggest beater we have because we're not quite sure what they're playing yet, and we don't want it to die to removal. They have the Trap Hole for our Battle Ox, which makes me very happy that I went for that instead of the Lodge-In. We will just set 1 card and pass to them. They're going to Pot of Greed again. That's very brutal for us. And they're going to activate Swords and set another card. So this is pretty bad for us. This deck doesn't main deck D-Spell because generally we don't care too much about swords, but against this matchup we definitely do. We do draw Ultimate Offering, which is very good if we ever draw our defensive pieces, but against the Exodia deck, it won't really matter. So we're going to pass back to them. They're going to pass back to us. We're just going to set a Wall of Illusion, because why not? We have 6 cards in hand, and so we might as well set this. Maybe bait out some removal if they think it's like an Armed Ninja or a Trap Master. So we're hoping to draw some removal. Unfortunately, it doesn't, but that happens, you know. We drew Dark Hole, which is, it's good to have removal at our disposal. They're just going to Raigeki our Wall of Illusion, so luckily it did draw the removal, just a bit later than expected. We're going to activate Swords just in case that's a main bug. It is unfortunately not, it's Spirit of the Harp. So we'll just summon out a Lodgin, Change of Heart, their Spirit of the Harp, and then attack in. Unfortunately, they do have Waboku, so they'll be able to prevent this damage, and they will get Spirit of the Harp at the end of the turn, which is unfortunate for us. They'll set 2, pass back to us. We drew another Ultimate Offering, which is unfortunate to see. It isn't really doing anything for us now. But we will Raigeki their Spirit of the Harp, just get it out of the way, and attack in with Lodgin. They will activate Ultimate Offering and use it to set a Defender, which will attack into, and unfortunately will not be able to get over. So they're just going to pass back to us. We do draw the Lodgin, which makes it a bit better to Dark Hole here, and then just bring out the other Lodgin. It's kind of unfortunate. If we had had a way to save our Raigeki for this moment, it would have been a lot better, but unfortunately there wasn't really a way to do that. And they did draw Exodia, as you can see here. So we do lose the first game, but let's see if the second game goes a bit better. Now, as a note for the side decking process, unfortunately Dueling Book doesn't actually show the side decking process, but I'm pretty sure what I did was I swapped out all the defensive cards like Wall of Illusion and the like for more offensive cards, as well as Card Destruction, Dispel, and Remove Trap, just to really put an end to their stall tools. I'm pretty sure I also sided in some reinforcements to pair with my beaters, just to enable them to get over the 2K defenders more easily. Of course, if they had sided into the Smokescreen aggro deck, this would have been side decking a bit too much, but I noticed in the duel that they clicked done siding immediately, so I was pretty sure that they didn't side into anything. I'm going to show both hands here just to show the effect that Card Destruction has on the Exodia deck and to show how devastating it can be. So we are going first here. We definitely want the first play, and we drew Dispel and Card Destruction, which are both very good to have in hand. Now, we could fire off the Card Destruction first turn, especially since, they don't have swords up right away, and we could honestly set a lot of these and that we want to keep. But generally, you don't want to blind Card Destruction. You want to wait to see what your opponent does, and if your opponent potentially could draw Exodia in the next turn, or if you think they have a bunch of pieces, then you'd want to use Card Destruction, because that makes sure that Card Destruction potentially hits the most pieces possible and is thus the most profitable for you. So we're just going to set one card and pass. There's no point summoning out the Wicked Worm Beast right now because we aren't able to attack, and it'll just return to our hand at the end of the turn anyways. So they draw a third piece, which is unfortunate, and they'll just set 2 and pass. I honestly think in hindsight, I should have Card Destructioned here, just because if they did have 4 pieces in hand, which is very unlikely, but possible, then Card Destruction would be very useful against that. But I choose to bet on the fact that they won't draw Exodia turn 3, and thus save the Card Destruction for later, which I don't think is the worst thing. It is very unlikely to draw Exodia turn 3, so it's probably good to save the Card Destruction. But I am in a very scary spot now, where they could just draw Exodia here, and I could have stopped it. But luckily, they don't have Exodia, they just have swords. We don't have any sort of offensive presence here, so we don't actually dispel the swords. We will just let them draw another card. They'll set again. I really think I should have Card Destructioned here, both to get rid of the pieces that they had in hand and also to draw into an offensive presence, but I do not. And luckily, they don't have Exodia yet. We will dispel and then bring out Wicked Worm Beast off of Monster Reborn just to get in that damage right away. And then we'll just pass back to them. They'll draw again. They'll Sword again, and I really think I should have fired Card Destruction here, but I don't. I am just betting on the fact that they're not going to draw Exodia this early, which they don't, but I took a bit of a risk doing this, and the risk paid off, but it won't always. They're just going to set one and set another and pass back to us, and I will Pot of Greed, draw 2. I'll Raigeki, their Mystical Elf, summon out Wicked Wormbeast, which they'll Trap Hole, unfortunately. But I will then set a bunch of cards, and I figure since they Pot of Greeded, they probably have a fair amount of pieces in hand, so I will actually Card Destruction. I will lose this Lodge In, I'll lose the Dark Hole, I'll lose the Change of Heart, but I will save the Raigeki and the Fisher for whatever they bring out. Reinforcements can enable Battlelog to get over 2k Defender, so honestly this isn't the worst for me, and it's just preventing them from stockpiling Exodia pieces in hand. So they'll discard 3 pieces, and they will draw 2 and a Pot of Greed, which is not the worst, but I at least got those 3 pieces out of hand. And I also drew a Monster Reborn, which will be pretty good for getting back the Wicked Wormbeast later. They draw, and they draw a second left arm, and they also have a left arm in the graveyard. So if we pull off one more Card Destruction, they've lost their win condition. They're going to Pot of Greed, drawing 2. They're just going to set one and pass. I think this is kind of unnecessary because they have Ultimate Offering in hand. So they could have just set the Ultimate Offering to bring it out during the battle phase instead. But we drew Dispel, and that's incredibly, incredibly good for us. We'll be able to Monster Reborn the Wicked Wormbeast here. Raigeki, clear away whatever they set, and just attack in for a bunch of damage. They do have Waboku, so they are able to prevent that damage from happening. We've still got a lot of offensive presence on board, which is pretty good. They have drawn a third piece of Exodia, which is pretty rough for us, but we don't have a Card Destruction in hand, so we can't do anything about that. They're going to activate their third and final Sword of Revealing Light, and they're just going to set a duplicate piece, which isn't the worst, but I think I would have probably saved that piece in hand. Although it's hard to tell. Maybe. So, with only 3 pieces in hand, they can't draw Exodia here. And this maybe makes it less likely that I'll activate Card Destruction here, because I'll wait for the point where they're actually threatening to draw Exodia and kill me. But I still think it might be a bit of a suspect play, especially since you could just activate Ultimate Offering in the battle phase to bring out the Exodia piece as a defender. But who knows? It's hard to say with playing around Card Destruction. But we don't have a Dispel, so we're just going to pass. They set another monster, which I think is pretty bad for them, because now they just die to Raigeki there. And they actually managed to have 4 pieces in hand, which is incredibly rough for us. We need Card Destruction, and luckily we get it. So their sword is still up. That was just a misclick. I will bring out the Wicked Wormbeast, set Monster Reborn, and fire off that Card Destruction, because I figure they probably have some pieces in hand, and they do. So given that they've got left arm on field and 2 left arms in graveyard, this actually means that they've lost their win condition. They could still stall us out long enough to the point where we reach deck out. That is a possibility. But from this position, it is incredibly likely that we win the game. So we're feeling pretty good. They do draw a bunch of removal spells, which is pretty nice. But we have Wicked Wormbeast, which can just dodge them. Can't dodge Trap Hole, but we've got the Monster Reborn for that. They're going to set the Trap Hole pass to us. We have Dispel, and we know that they have no Sword of Revealing Light left since they've used up all 3. So we are just going to try and snipe a bluff if they set a spell card as a bluff. Turns out that they haven't, but this D-spell would go to waste anyways. So we're just going to use it, see one of their back row. We see that they do have an Ultimate Offering in play, which is a bit unfortunate, but it isn't the worst thing in the world for us. We bring out Battle Ox. We are just going to Monster Reborn here. They've used up all 3 trap holes, so we're not afraid about summoning our Wicked Wormbeast and losing it. So we can feel comfortable just using a Monster Reborn to bring out Lodgin, especially because we don't actually know that they've run out of the left arm, because we don't know what this card is that's set. So we are just going to Monster Reborn to bring back the Lodgin to get in for more damage. And we are just going to attack. And seeing that piece makes us very happy about that, because this just means that they cannot actually pull off the Exodia win condition. They're going to set 3 here, probably to play around card destruction, but also they know that all 3 of our D-spells are gone, so they don't have to worry about being punished for a bluff. And they're just going to set the last piece that they have in hand. I feel like that's a mistake. I feel like they should have just used Ultimate Offering to use it as a defender, but they're basically dead anyways. So we're just going to bring out a Wicked Wormbeast. We're going to attack into that piece, and then we unfortunately attack into a Mystical Elf. We do have a reinforcement set, but unfortunately we attacked in the wrong order, and Wicked Wormbeast can't actually get over a Mystical Elf. We could use up 2 reinforcements here to do that, but I figure why waste 2 cards when we could just clear it with Fisher next turn and attack into whatever they set with Lodgin and use reinforcements there. So we get the Wicked Wormbeast back. They draw another defender, and it looks like they are going to use Ultimate Offering on that one. We're going to bring out Wicked Wormbeast, Fisher, their Mystical Elf, attack in with Wicked Wormbeast. They're going to Ultimate Offering to set. Since the way that replay works at this time will enable the Wicked Wormbeast to attack later in the battle phase, even though it already declared an attack, we're just going to switch to attacking with Lodgin here, because if it is a 2k defender, then Lodgin can get over it with 1 reinforcements, and we'll still be able to get in for 14 later on in the turn. So we are going to attack in here and use up a reinforcements. They won't actually be able to use Waboku since we waited to the damage step to activate reinforcements, and Waboku cannot be activated in the damage step. So we will be able to clear that and attack directly with the Wicked Wormbeast. We pass back to them. They're going to Dark Hole or Lodgin, which is pretty good, but they can't get rid of the Wicked Wormbeast, so we're just going to attack in with that again. We're going to set 1 card. We are going to use Ultimate Offering to set a Man-Eater Bug, because we've got an additional Man-Eater Bug in hand. They're not attacking. Man-Eater Bug on field enables us to clear whatever they have, potentially. So we might as well do it. And then we pass back to them. They just draw the head of Exodia. They're going to Dark Hole, and they're just going to set in order to save the life points, probably. But it could also be to sort of get removal out of the way. But honestly, I think that they are low enough on life points that maybe not the best play. But I don't know. We'll see. So we draw another Dark Hole, which makes us feel fine just using a Dark Hole on the head. And we're going to summon out Wicked Wormbeast, get in for some damage here, and drop them down to 1900, which is actually a perfect amount of damage, which you'll see in a second. Wicked Wormbeast comes back to hand. They just have another Ultimate Offering, so they're going to pass to us, and we will summon out Wicked Wormbeast. Now, as a note, they do have a Waboku here. So, on our attack, they could Waboku this attack. They choose not to Waboku the attack on attack declaration. So, we are actually able to, in the damage step, activate reinforcements and boost up Wicked Wormbeast by 500. to deal exact lethal damage. And this can't be responded to by Waboku because Waboku can't be activated in the damage step. So this is actually an important thing to keep in mind. I don't think it actually would have mattered in the case of this game, since this game was pretty much locked up. There was nothing they could really do against the Wicked Worm Beast coming back every turn, and I had enough removal to make sure it could keep attacking in. But it is good to know in the future that this sort of interaction does exist. So that's game 2, and I think it's a pretty good example of how card destruction can be really devastating for an Exodia deck, and it also illustrates a really key interaction that can come up that's very important to know about. But let's just dive right into game 3 to see how the whole thing ends. So game 3, I kept in the same changes that we made for game 2. Again, Concane sided very, very quickly, so I figured that they did not side in to the smokescreen aggro strategy. So I felt good keeping the card destructions and all that stuff in the main deck. So we are going second because they lost. They get to choose whether to go first or second. They're going to draw a trap hole and set it and pass back to us. We're going to summon out a Battle Ox. They're just going to preemptively trap hole it. Prevents them from taking damage there. We'll set a Raigeki as a bluff just in case they are on smokescreen aggro and pass back to them. They managed to draw the 4th piece of Exodia, which is pretty darn good. And they're just going to activate a Sword of Revealing Light and pass to us. Now, we do draw card destruction here. And we could use card destruction here, as they have not set any other spells or traps besides Sword of Revealing Light, which signals that they likely don't have trap cards in hand. And they may not even have a defender in hand that they could set as sort of a backup in case we have Dispel. So I think that firing card destruction here would have been very, very good and defendable. However, I choose not to because I figure that it is very, very unlikely that they are actually going to draw Exodia in the first few turns. So I just set the card destruction and pass back to them. They manage to draw another sword, which they will set, and then they'll pass back to us. And I think I really should have card destruction now, just because, like, the fact that they set shows that they are wanting to set other spells and traps. It's just they don't have any good ones to set. So I think I can read that they have a bunch of Exodia pieces in hand, and thus activating card destruction would be profitable. But I choose to wait just a bit longer. So I just set a Manure Bug to deal with anything that they may bring out as a monster. Pass back to them. And they managed to draw Waboku, which they will set. Again, I could probably use the card destruction here because they have not done anything with the first 5 cards that were in their hand. So I should probably read that they have a bunch of pieces. But I choose to wait. And they still don't have Exodia. They'll activate another swords. And that will kill the Manure Bug. They'll set a monster and pass. And at this point, it should be clear that I should fire the card destruction because they set a monster this time when they had swords, when they didn't last time, which means that they definitely didn't have any defenders in hand last time. So they can only really have Exodia pieces. But I choose to play it safe or take a risk, I guess. Yeah, I would actually be taking a risk to do this instead of card destructioning on this particular game state. I pass back to them, and they are able to draw the last piece and draw into Exodia. So they do actually win the match despite us having sided into card destruction. And I think this is actually a very good lesson to learn when playing against Exodia after you sided into card destruction, is that I think that you should very much not be conservative with the card destructions. When it seems like your opponent may have a couple pieces, even if you don't have confirmation, I think you should just fire the card destruction. Because firing the card destruction will both set them back by at least one piece, most likely, and also draw you closer to your next card destruction, which will enable you to then pick apart their Exodia pieces even more thoroughly. So even if it isn't guaranteed that a card destruction activation will completely knock them out of the game, it will basically set them back to the beginning and can really just make it hard for them to amass the pieces in time for you to draw your second card destruction and clear away all their progress again. So I think I should have card destruction there, and we actually did sort of see what was coming after that. So we actually did just look at the top 5 cards of the deck, and they were just nothing. They were cards that would not have helped at all. So it would have actually cleared their progress away. So in this game, the card destruction would have actually been incredibly good. I generally don't like to use this sort of metric or like after game sort of checking to judge whether a certain strategy is good or not, because realistically, like, those top 5 cards could have been anything else in the deck and not the specific cards that they were. But I do think it's just good here just to sort of drive the point home that I do think the card destruction early on would have been the correct move, but unfortunately I did not do it. But I think this shows off how good the sideboard against Exodia can be. I think it shows off how Exodia really has sort of fallen from grace a bit. It's lost its just top, best deck of the format status that it had in the last format, and it's still a good deck, but it's become a lot worse, which I think is better for the health of the format, because Exodia is a very degenerate deck. Now, this game didn't really show off the smokescreen aggro version of the deck, as Concane kept in all the Exodia pieces each time after siding, but the smokescreen aggro version of the deck is kind of not the best either. Like, the defenders that you have to play, because you're siding out all the pieces of Exodia to bring in all your aggro pieces, the defenders that you have to play are not the best cards when you're trying to go on the offensive. And your opponent will likely have sided in cards to deal with them. Sure, they've sided out things like Swords of Revealing Light or Trap Hole, which are very good against aggro strategies in general, so it's unlikely that they'll be able to deal with like Wicked Wormbeast if you manage to get that out. But they'll likely have reinforcements, just things that can let them go on the offensive. They'll have remove traps for the Ultimate Offering. They'll have dispels for the Swords of Revealing Light that you have, and they'll just be able to go a lot more offensive than you can, even though they've sided out a lot of their cards that are generally good against an aggro deck. So I do think the smokescreen aggro side, while it's definitely the move because card destruction and the like is just terrible for the deck, it is also just not as good as an aggro deck after siding for Exodia. So I think that while this deck can win games, I think that Exodia has really lost its top deck status. And I think that's really cool to see, because, it's the nature of a game like this. When new cards are constantly getting introduced, the older strategies that were good with a more limited card pool lose their power, or lose a lot of their power at least. But anyways, that's going to wrap it up for the Exodia deck here. I may show off the deck again on the channel later, sort of showing off what it looks like when it does smokescreen aggro, or showing off its matchup against other decks, because I actually think that Worm Control has the worst matchup against Exodia of all the aggro decks. I think that pretty much any other aggro deck is actually much better, because, for instance, Tribute aggro can steal the opponent's monsters and tribute them off for Summon Skull, which can get over any 2k defender. Conga Line aggro can constantly get out monsters to attack over 2k defenders with things like reinforcements and stuff like that. And, Worm Beast aggro is playing things that will enable its beaters to get over defenders. You can either play reinforcements in the deck like I had in the original version, or fissures, but either one can actually deal with 2k defenders quite well. So I actually think that worm control or worm reaction, I've called it both terms, I actually think that this deck is the worst of the aggro decks against Exodia, and it actually put up a very good showing against it. I think it would have actually won the whole match if I had played card destruction more smartly in the last game. So I think that Exodia has really fallen. It may be not even a tier 1 deck, but maybe a tier 2 deck at this point, which is crazy to say. But only time will tell, and we've got plenty more duels ahead of us on this channel, so we'll be able to test that out in the future. But anyways, again, I've been Ben with YGO from Zero, and I'll see you next time.